Okay. Hi, good morning, task force members. This is LK Nandam, Southwest Central Florida Connector Task Force Chair and District Secretary with FDOT District 1. It's been a while since we have seen each other in person. At least now we get the opportunity to see each other on the video. I want to say thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to express our continued concern for the health and safety of your families, friends, and communities. We've appreciated your flexibility as we have continued to evolve the structure of these meetings. As you may have noticed, we are now calling these virtual meetings rather than webinars. The intent is to communicate the purpose of our meetings is not just for us to push information out to you, but for the task force members to have a robust dialogue. So I'm hoping to see that today. Today we will share brief updates on the technical analysis and the framework for your recommendations. Most of the time will be spent discussing needs, guiding principles, and instructions for project development and beyond. We covered one of those topics, broadband, earlier this month. Today, we will do the same for a few other topics and start looking at the comprehensive list of high-level needs. Our deadline is fast approaching. While we have accomplished a lot, it is time to get to work, time to get back on track and meet our commitment to finish the report as directed by the legislature and the governor. We also have appreciated the participation from members of the public. The 9 webinars held in April, May, and early June included participation from 2,393 attendees. That's 2,393 attendees and 163 people, 163 people providing public comment to the task forces during the designated period. These numbers are well above what we experienced during the in-person task force meetings. I also want to thank the many members of the public who provided their comments via email, letters, and other formats. Public comment during our meetings is not the only way for the public to provide their input. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. We will compile and share all public comments received since February at our next meeting in July. We hope to return to a regular meeting schedule in July. These future meetings will be a different form than from what we expected or experienced last fall and winter in person, as well as what we have experienced during the past few months with everything being virtual. We are developing options for a hybrid format that will allow some members of the task force and public to be in a central location, while others participate virtually and remotely. We will share details soon, but please be assured at all times our approach to meetings will abide by the governor's executive order for the safe, smart, step-by-step plan for Florida's recovery, abide by government in sunshine and all applicable public meeting rules, respect your level of comfort and your organization's guidelines with in-person gatherings. Most importantly, provide for a meeting format that maximizes the ability of all task force members to engage in discussion and develop consensus, as well as for the public to participate in and provide comment during the process. Our proposed meeting date of July 23rd at Lee County Civic Center helps achieve all of these items. We have to look for a new date, as with all that is going on and the need to have a hybrid meeting, it was difficult to find venues to host a meeting on the previously selected date. With that, I will turn it over to Karen, our facilitator, to go over the agenda for the meeting. Karen?
Thank you, LK. I want to express my thanks to the task force for joining us today for virtual meeting number 4. I'm going to briefly cover several topics this morning. The public comment period, which has changed a little bit, the logistics for the virtual meeting and how we're going to engage today, today's objectives and agenda, and of course, a brief Florida sunshine reminder. The public comment period will begin at approximately 11:30 or as soon as we are done with task force member discussion. We've enhanced the approach to the public comment period to be more in line with an in-person meeting, and requests to comment may now be made up to 11 a.m. this morning and will be addressed during the public comment period in the order they were received. If you have not registered to provide public comment during today's virtual meeting and wish to do so, please sign up on the website under today's event. If you need the link emailed to you, please use the raise hand function now, and one of our team members will email you the link to sign up. During the public comment period, when your name is called, we will unmute your line for you to provide comment within the allotted time of 3 minutes. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please make sure to unmute before speaking. If you did not submit your request in time to be able to speak today, please email any comments, which you can do at any time, to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. This meeting is being recorded and will be available with other materials on the EMCOR's website. You will remain muted for the presentations, and once we get into the task force member discussions, we'll shift to a more interactive format. Similar to the previous webinar, our discussion today will be more like an in-person meeting. Instead of putting up your tent card to indicate you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can use the raise hand feature. This is for task force members. We would ask you to remain self-muted when not speaking to reduce the background noise. I generally will recognize people in the order that they raise their hand, although as we do in an in-person meeting, I may manage the flow at times to allow members who have not yet had an opportunity to make a comment to speak or to wrap up one thread of conversation before we begin another. If you have self-muted, please make sure to unmute before speaking. As a quick reminder, do not put the meeting on hold or take another call, as we will hear your hold music. One last note, you've noticed we've adjusted your username to readily identify you as a task force member for when we need to unmute lines. Please do not make any changes to this username so that you may be heard during the Q&A period. Today's objectives are to receive an update on the task force work plan and recommendations framework. Also to receive another update on the avoidance and attraction layers in the GIS tool. Refine high-level needs and guiding principles and identify potential instructions for development and beyond, and of course to receive public comments. Today's agenda, I'll run through a refresher on the government in sunshine, and then we'll do a roll call. We'll then have a presentation from Wei Shen, Fdot Chief Planner, on the revised task force work plan and recommendations framework, followed by a presentation from Marlon Becerra, the Southwest Central Florida Corridor Production Lead from Fdot District 1, on the updated avoidance and attraction areas. Then the task force will have a discussion as a group about the high-level needs, followed by a discussion on selected guiding principles. Then we'll briefly touch on next steps and return to public comments. As I mentioned, the public comment period is scheduled to begin at 11:30 a.m. or as soon as the agenda items are complete. It is expected to last approximately 30 minutes, and we hope all task force members will be able to stay on the line. For government in the sunshine, just as a short reminder, generally speaking, task force members should not communicate verbally through email or through a third party to another task force member on items under consideration by the specific task force. You may communicate on matters unrelated to task force topics. Our Attorney General supporting this quarter task force is John Fricka, and his contact information is shown here, and he's able to answer questions if need be. I will now move into the task force member roll call. As task force members were given unique links to sign in, and then as they logged in, we noted attendance. I'm going to read through the names and organizations that are present and who is not in attendance. If we happen to not catch you, or you find a task force member has arrived late, we will pick that up throughout the virtual meeting. So with that, most of our task force members are here. I will represented, so I will go through the list. Polk State College is represented by Tamara Sagagawa. Florida Southwestern State College is represented by Bob Jones. South Florida State College is excused today. The Florida Public Service Commission is represented by Mark Futrell. Lee County MPO is represented by Donald Scott. The Charlotte County Punta Gorda MPO by Chris Constance. The Heartland Regional TPO by Colin Lambert. The Polk County TPO by Nat Birdsong. The Southwest Florida our Regional Planning Council by Bill McDaniel. The Central Florida Regional Planning Council by Pat Steed. The Florida Chamber of Commerce by Katie Worthington Decker. The Florida Trucking Association by Dave Rovich. The Florida Rural Water Association by Jerry Burr. The Florida Internet and Television Association by Bill Ferry. The Florida Economic Development Council by Sherry Ambrose. The Florida Farm Bureau Federation by Gary Ritter. Maxwell Hendry and Simmons by Matt Caldwell. The Nature Conservancy by Wendy Matthews. The Florida Wildlife Corridor, Jason Lauritsen, is not able to be with us as yet. The Everglades Foundation is represented by Sharon Estinos. Defenders of Wildlife by Elizabeth Fleming. Audubon Florida by Paul Gray. 1,000 Friends of Florida is also not yet represented on the virtual meeting. The South Florida Water Management District is represented by Melissa Roberts. The Southwest Florida Water Management District is represented by Brian Starford. The Collier County Commission is represented by Penny Taylor. The Lee County Commission by Cecil Pendergrass. The Charlotte County Commission by Ken Doherty. The Hendry County Commission is not represented today. The Glades County Commission is represented by John Ahern. The DeSoto County Commission is not represented today. Hardy County Commission is represented by Mike Thompson. The Highlands County Commission is not represented today. The Polk County Commission is represented by Rick Wilson. The Florida Department of Environmental Protection is represented by Chris Stahl. The Florida Department of Economic Opportunity is represented by Pam Johnson. The Florida Department of Education is not represented today. Neither is the Florida Department of Health. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission is represented by Tom Grape. The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services does not have a representative today. Enterprise Florida is represented by Eric Anderson. The Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation by Tim McGrath. Career Source Florida by Ann Martin. Volunteer Florida by Rochelle Johnson. The Florida Department of Transportation by Tracy Hood, and of course L.K. Nandam, and Collier County MPO by Ann McLaughlin. So with that, for the first topic today, I'm pleased to introduce Wei Shen, the FDOT Chief Planner, who will talk about Task Force Recommendations Framework. Wei.
Good morning. I wanted to take a few minutes to set the stage for today's virtual meeting and for your next few meetings by summarizing the proposed framework for your recommendations and the final report. Will Watts, FDOT Chief Engineer, is also available today to answer questions. The left part of this slide lists the 6 statutory purposes for MCORS. We're using these as a starting point. So all your recommendations tie back to at least one of these 6 purposes. As you look at this list, what jumps out is that most of this language is not specifically about transportation. It's about communities, the economy, the environment, and other related topics. The statute directs all of us to think about the type of communities we want in the future, and then to consider how transportation corridors can support that vision. This broad framework contemplated by the legislature allows your recommendations to be about more than just how FDOT plans a specific corridor. You also could be providing recommendations about the types of conservation, land use, community development, or economic development strategies that would support a transportation corridor in addressing these purposes. This slide recaps the statutory objective for MCORS, which is a specific charge to FDOT to advance construction of corridor projects. The statute specifically sets the vision of a multimodal, multi-use corridor and provides specific capabilities for DOT in terms of innovative approaches to right-of-way acquisition and other tools to advance this vision. So as you consider your recommendations, there are two related questions before you. First, how can a program of multi-use, multimodal corridor investments support the broad statutory purposes in the study area? Second, how should key partners work together to address these statutory purposes? FDOT, along with other state agencies, local governments, MPOs, RPCs, and other partners. You've seen this slide before. This is the recommendations framework to address the statutory requirements. The statute describes the responsibility of the task force, which essentially are to provide consensus recommendations in the three areas: the high-level needs for a corridor in the study area, the why, guiding principles for planning and developing a corridor, that answers the how question, and then instructions for FDOT and other partners to carry out the task force's recommendations in project development and beyond. That addresses the question about what's next. At each step of this process, the intent is to support your recommendations with data and ensure there is an explicit handoff to what comes next in terms of planning, project development, design, and further future steps. We introduced this framework at the first webinar in April. Let's take a few minutes to walk through each step using examples. High-level needs essentially refer to the regional opportunities and challenges the corridor is intended to address. The needs are informed by the 6 categories of purpose and the 13 areas of benefit listed in the statute, as well as task force and public input. They're intended to be short statements of text supported by data and easily communicated with partners and the public. We are identifying high-level needs early in the process to make sure all subsequent activities tie back to the fundamental questions of how a corridor addresses the unique opportunities and challenges in the study area and the broad statutory purposes. As the process moves along, we'll be able to get more specific in terms of developing evaluation criteria to determine to what extent the recommended needs are met by the corridor. The high-level needs language you develop eventually will become the basis for a more formal purpose and need in the project development and environmental process. Those of you familiar with the state PD&E process or the federal NEPA process know that the formal purpose and need often is a detailed chapter with lots of supporting information. We're headed there eventually, but we don't have the specific levels of details yet. The statute reads that each task force shall evaluate the need for and the economic and environmental impacts of hurricane evacuation impacts of and land use impacts of the related corridor. Based on where we are in the process today, the evaluation you're able to do in terms of these needs generally is to look at available data and forecasts and provide your recommendations on how to define needs and your instructions on how to assess whether these needs are met in future planning and project development. I know that many of you would like to have more specifics now on traffic, future traffic or land use impact because we're still at such a high level, it is difficult to pin these numbers down. But we do believe that establishing the right foundation today will guide the process moving forward. These are examples of some of the types of high-level needs that you might identify for this study area, and you will have some time today to look at a specific list in a few minutes. Once the high-level needs are described, we will turn to guiding principles. The guiding principles are core values that guide decision about the corridor. They are the how we develop a corridor to address the needs. They generally are short statements supported by technical notes where needed. The guiding principles help identify avoidance and attraction areas and evaluate and narrow potential corridor path courses. They also will guide decisions about corridor location, design, mitigation, and other commitments long after your report is submitted. So far, we have looked at guiding principles in 4 categories based on the types of resources they address: natural, cultural, social, and physical. We may still use this organization where needed, but we also want to start tying the guiding principles more specifically to the needs they address. So returning to one of the needs from 2 slides ago, here's one of the potential guiding principles you discussed earlier as a task force to ensure the corridor addresses the identified needs. The third step in this process is the instructions for project development and beyond. It's not enough to recommend why and how. We also need to specify what's next. We've talked many times about the Wekiva Task Force report. A lot of the impact of this report came from the 18 guiding principles, 10 on corridor location and 8 on corridor design. Most of these principles were short. For example, does not encourage or promote additional development from already approved land uses. Include the maximum provision for bridging through strategically important wetlands. But they carry weight because they were specific. They provided instruction through related documents to project development, and they were monitored over time. The instructions are how we make the connection from the principles back to what FDOT or specific partners need to do next. This could mean addressing corridor location, such as the input you had already provided to use on areas a corridor should avoid or areas that should attract a corridor. It also could mean identifying existing facilities that could be enhanced or might be opportunities for co-location. It also could mean identifying connectivity gaps that may need to be addressed through a new corridor in some parts of the study area. The instructions also could go beyond those specific location decisions to note implementation strategies that should be carried forward, refined, and implemented during planning, project development, design, and other activities. For example, you might give general instructions about consistency with local land use plans today, recognizing that the details will be worked out over time as we move from a path course to a more specific alignment. Or you might, as the Wekiva Task Force did, make general statements about creating wildlife crossings or bridging wetlands, recognizing that the location for where that happens will get detailed over time. Ultimately, The instructions communicate the intent of the task force in applying the guiding principles. This is where we also can document some of the issues that may not be fully resolved when the report is adopted, or that you want to flag as needing more attention moving forward. So let's look at our example one more time. Based on the high-level needs and guiding principles we've discussed, here are some of the specific instructions for project development and beyond that could be developed moving forward. Let's tie everything together. Eventually, your recommendations will address all 6 purposes in statute, and you will produce recommendations on high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions related to all these topics. During your meetings to date, we've made great progress in laying the foundation to develop these recommendations. The task force has spent a lot of time learning about the study area, reviewing trends and conditions, reviewing local government comprehensive plans, and hearing from subject matter experts on topics like the environment, economic, workforce development, technology, and broadband. You also have heard from the public at every meeting. The task force has also helped review many data layers and identify potential avoidance and attraction areas so that you have information to support your recommendations. You have reviewed and provided guidance on existing facilities that could be opportunities for enhancement or co-location. And you've started a working list of high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions that has been refined over time. Today, we will start building out this framework by row. We will take a few examples and work through left to right to define our high-level needs, guiding principles, and instructions. This is how we addressed broadband at the last meeting. We'll work through 3 more topics today, and these are intended as examples to help us make progress. We'll take a more comprehensive view at the next few meetings. We also will start working through this framework by column. Today, we'll spend some time looking at the high-level needs as a set to see if we have comprehensively addressed all of them. Our hope is that between today and our next meeting in July, we can reach consensus on the high-level needs. We'll focus during meetings 6 through 8 on wrapping up the guiding principles and documenting the instructions so that you're close to a final report at that time. Note that for each of these columns, we'll bring you a draft at one meeting, get your feedback, and then bring a revised draft at the subsequent meeting. As you can see, the schedule is very aggressive. Now we are at that critical point where we need to roll up our sleeves, sharpen our pencils, and turn our thoughts into a consensus-driven report. Before I wrap up, let me briefly describe our thinking on the task force report. We anticipate the final report may be 10 to 15 pages, consistent with the length of other recent task force efforts. The first 3 sections will summarize the background of the legislation, the task force membership and process, including public and agency involvement, and the study area characteristics. We'll bring draft of these sections for you to review. The 4th section is the heart of the report. Your recommendations on high-level needs, principles, and instructions. We'll work on this together over the next few meetings. This section will focus on your specific recommendations with supporting narrative, including documenting significant concerns that are not resolved and would need to be addressed moving forward. The final section will be an action plan. This is what the task force recommends in terms of future planning and project development, as well as ongoing partner coordination, including the role of the organizations on this task force in future activities and monitoring these recommendations. This report outline would not include specific recommendations on an alignment or projects because we're still early in the planning process, but it would include clear guidance on how these decisions should be made. We will bring a more specific outline to your next meeting for discussion. We want to share this today to give you a sense of where we're headed, and also to remind you that the goal is for consensus on the final report as a package. I know this will be challenging since getting to consensus is not easy. It will require back and forth discussions, trade-offs, and concessions. It's going to be an iterative process, and we need all to focus on the critical tasks ahead. So now, Karen, let's see if we have any questions for the slides that I presented.
Great, yes, so task force members, remember this is going to be like our in-person meetings. Instead of a tent card, please use the raise hand function. Let us know if you have any questions for Weiwei at this point.
Karen, this is Elizabeth Fleming. I couldn't understand what you just said.
Oh, if you are connected only by phone, you won't have a raise hands function. But if you're raised, what we're going to do is if you are connected by the computer, please use the raise hands function to indicate if you have any questions for Weiwei. So I noticed that you may be connected only by phone. Did you have a comment? Question, I mean?
I just couldn't hear you, so I was trying to ask you to repeat what you said, but I am on the computer and I can raise my hand.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, I had the microphone wrong. Okay, so we are last chance, not seeing any hands go up. Oh, no, we have a couple. We have a couple hands. I apologize. Paul Gray, and then Penny Taylor.
Hi, thank you. Just to clarify, Weiwei, you said that you expect the final report to be 15 to 20 pages long?
Correct, Paul. That's kind of consistent with what we need to have in the report, high-level needs, guiding principles, and consistent with the past task force efforts. That's just the starting point for our discussion. We'll bring an outline for you guys to look at your July meeting.
All right, well, thank you. That just helps me get a perspective on how dense it's going to be.
Penny Taylor?
Good. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, I just have a question of what is your definition of consensus?
The task force engagement plan reviewed at your first meeting states that the task force will strive for consensus on the recommendations as a package to be included in the final report. Consensus will be defined and documented as members being able to support, accept, live with, or agree not to oppose the package of recommendations for the final report. So given the focus on the package of recommendations, it is possible that not every task force member will agree with every single recommendation in the report. However, we're striving for consensus on the final package of recommendation, and we'll document significant concerns and also actions that needed to be further explored moving forward.
Will there be a formal vote taken?
I think for your next few meetings, the facilitators will try to gauge your acceptance of the needs and the guiding principles, not taking a vote, but potentially at the last meeting, there could be a vote taken to see if we have consensus on the final report as a package. consensus is a process that we work through. So hopefully we'll have robust discussions back and forth, trade-offs, concessions that we can make sure that all task force members could at least agree not to oppose to the report as a whole package.
And thank you very much for that explanation. I think that's going to be very tricky without a formal vote on each item. I think the interpretation by the facilitator is left up for interpretation, so to speak. I think it becomes even trickier with us on a webcam service, the way that we are participating, and given what is ahead of us, I would respectfully ask you to reconsider this, but you certainly do not need to answer this now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Wei, I'm not seeing any other raised hands, so we can move on in the agenda. With that, I'm going to introduce Marlon Becerra with the FDOT District 1, the production lead for this corridor.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marlon Becerra with Florida DOT, and at this time I would like to provide an update on changes made to the GIS tool. We appreciate the data provided by task force members and are actively updating the GIS tool based on requests made during those technical briefings or during any task force meetings since meeting number 4. Since this is a living tool and can be updated throughout the task force process, we have revised the task force meeting number 4 comments layer group to reflect layers requested by task force members for avoidance consideration. This layer group is now called Task Force Requests. We are actually working to update the requested and approved layers in the GIS tool, and those should be available in the near future. However, some requested layers have not been included for use. We will work with the task force members who requested those layers and follow up with them on why they have not been included prior to task force meeting number 6. Finally, we revised some of the layer names to provide more consistency between the Suncoast connector and Northern Turnpike connector GIS tools, and added more capabilities to the tool by including the draw and measurement features. The avoidance map presented at webinar number 1 has not been changed. However, we are adding layers to both the avoidance and attraction areas. We are currently updating the tool to include the following avoidance layers, which have been requested since webinar number 1. The Florida Panther Northern Focal Area, the Southwest Florida Water Management District Inactive Monitoring Sites, the South Florida Water Management District Active and Inactive Monitoring Sites, and schools ranging from pre-kindergarten to high school. We are also updating the attraction areas in the tool based on task force member requests since webinar number 1. The attraction layers that have been recently been added are the power plant locations, transmission lines, natural pipelines, drinking water source. For example, if an area is known or assumed to have the drinking water provided by a public water facility or from a well. wastewater facilities, and active mining areas. You can click on the same layer group that was presented during webinar number 1 and find the new and updated layers to assist you with the categorization of the avoidance layers. As a reminder, categorization of the requested and approved avoidance layers will be discussed at Task Force meeting number 6. Those categories include, number 1, Task Force will not impact. Number 2, Task Force no new corridor through. Number 3, impact only with enhancements. And number 4, Fdot standard analysis. If you have questions or need further clarification on the layers in advance of the meeting number 6 discussion, we will be reaching out to each task force members to schedule a follow-up to the previously held technical briefing. The GIS map is a crucial tool to help link the study area needs to the guiding principles and the future phase implementation instructions as we move from the task force process into future phases of the AIM course program. Please remember, this is a living tool, and requests for updates to avoidance and attraction areas can be made and will be taken into consideration during the task force process. GIS map number 2 can be found on the MCourse website by going to floridamcourse.com and hovering over the interactive maps drop-down menu and selecting Southwest Central Florida Connector GIS map number 2. This is on the public MCourse website and can be accessed by the general public and task force members at any time during this process. Lastly, the GIS map can also be accessed with your mobile device, and it will automatically size itself in a friendly way for ease of use. With that, I will turn over to Karen, our facilitator. Thank you.
Thanks, Marlon. We're now going to turn over to talking about the list of high-level needs for this study area. In Weiwei's presentation, needs were described as key regional opportunities and challenges that corridor investments and related actions are intended to address. These tie to the 6 categories of purpose and the 13 potential benefits in statute. So they can be transportation specific and transportation supported. These should be short statements supported by data. Note that the consensus is on the full packet final report as a package, and this would be needs, guiding principles, and instructions. You've talked about high-level needs specifically during in-person meeting number 3 in December and meeting number 5 in February. But your discussions have touched on regional challenges and opportunities at some point during every in-person and virtual meeting to date. A draft list of high-level needs is provided, taken from these discussions, and was shown here today for your review. We targeted to keeping the list to fewer than 10 statements to ensure that all of them can be supported by data. I'm going to briefly run through them as written for now in a minute. Just recall that there are 6 categories listed as the purpose behind the MCourse program: revitalize rural communities, encourage job creation, next slide please, provide regional connectivity, leverage technology, enhance the quality of life and public safety, and protect the environment and natural resources. We're going to go over these high-level needs, where needs are intended to answer the why a multimodal, multi-use investments may be appropriate. So with that, I'm going to read through a list of the draft high-level needs for the Southwest Central Corridor. At the end, we'll put the full list up and then ask for some questions. So the first set, these are on 2 slides. First, next slide, please. Support anticipated population and economic growth in coastal communities and urban areas. Help inland and rural areas increase economic activity and economic diversity. Enhance access to jobs, education, healthcare, and goods and services. Create employment opportunities, particularly to assist lower income residents and help retain younger residents in the area. Improve highway limited access interregional connectivity for residents, freight, and visitors between existing communities and external markets. Help rural and underserved areas improve infrastructure and connectivity for people, freight, and information. Strengthen emergency evacuation and response. Protect and enhance environmentally sensitive areas, wildlife, and natural resources, such as water, and improve connectivity among these resources. Prepare for emerging and future technologies such as for vehicles and enhanced operational and maintenance capabilities. And expand the transportation system options, such as shared use non-motorized trails, freight and passenger rail, and public transit. So this next slide puts all 10 of them on the same page so that you can see them together. They are intended, these high-level needs are intended to capture and reflect the various needs identified by task force members over the last meetings. And we're looking for big picture type of comments at this point in time. We're sharing this list now, and we'll bring it back in the July meeting in July with the revised draft, and hope that the discussion can come to an agreement on the list of needs. So first of all, for task force members, in looking at this list of high-level needs, are there any questions or clarifications that need to be clarified? And second, we'd like to get your thought on this list as a set. Does it represent the major opportunities and challenges related to transportation in the Southwest Central Corridor? Are there significant needs that are missing? And is there anything that raises significant concern for you? So with that, I'm going to open it up to task force members to respond using the raise hand function. I see, and this will be open for task force members only. So Brian Starford, would you like to provide your comments?
Yes, thank you, Karen. One thing I don't see on here is the data collection sites that we've discussed several times in our task force meetings. I do see references to the environment, and which I would assume, because this is high level, is talking about our conservation lands, and but I definitely would like to see from a high level need the data collection as being a high level need. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that thought. I see Shannon Estenos. And others, if you have comments and want to start raising your hand, that's fine. Shannon?
Oh, yes. Thank you, Karen. 2 quick questions. On the bullet that discusses environmentally sensitive areas, improved connectivity among these resources, we're talking about ecological connectivity, or are we talking about transportation connectivity? I mean, that may be a silly question, but I think that I'm assuming that it's ecological connectivity or hydrological connectivity. But I think we need to clarify, since this entire task force is about connecting people by transportation, we might want to clarify that point. And then,
yep,
yeah.
clarify connectivity. Thank you.
Okay, and then the second one is, I raised this in the first 1 or 2 task force meetings, and I'm not sure we ever really got a good briefing on it, but your bullet about strengthening emergency evacuation and response, I'm assuming we're talking in large part about hurricane evacuation in particular. So where you've got potentially mass evacuation over a short period of time. And, there are a lot of dimensions to hurricane evacuation, a lot of dimensions. And there's a tremendous amount of interconnectivity between, for example, how local governments emphasize their own approach to hurricane evacuation. So if you look at a comp plan for a local government and they're increasing the number of development units, and part of the justification for them increasing those development units is a bigger emphasis on sheltering in place. So on one side of the equation, you have folks saying we need to do more sheltering in place so that we don't put so many folks on the road. But then usually when you're talking about building new roads, one of the first things we talk about is, oh, we need to put a bunch of people on the road and get them out for hurricane evacuation. So I'm wondering if we're going to spend a little bit more time learning about how the state, how the various levels of government activity and government planning knit together to form our emergency evacuation approach, and then how does the planning of new roads fit into that? And then the last thing I would say is, to the extent that new roads induce new development, well, you're right back where you started from. Bigger roads, more development, more people to evacuate. Are we sheltering in place? Are we putting them on yet new roads? So I don't know if we plan on having a little bit more in-depth conversation at any of the future task force meetings, or maybe I missed it. And anyway, thank you.
Thanks. I see Pat Steed has raised her hand. Pat? You're self-muted, Pat. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. This is just a wordsmith, but on the one that says help rural and underserved areas improve infrastructure and connectivity for people, freight, and information, I think maybe instead of information, that should be technology, because that implies a whole lot of things, both information and beyond.
All right. We'll make that change. I'm not seeing any other comments from the task force members, so we will take this.
Karen, this is Paul Gray.
Oh, Paul, I'm sorry. I thought I had moved everybody up. Paul, go ahead.
Okay. A couple things. Right now in the interior, the biggest industry, the biggest economic engine is agriculture. And this list really doesn't address agriculture. And, considering it's the biggest economic driver in the interior, I think we would want to preserve an agricultural infrastructure that, keeps the watershed as green as possible. And I realize, agriculture hasn't made these communities as prosperous as we'd like, and we're going to need to do other things to help improve jobs and the economy. But we should specifically protect agriculture in these bullets. And we protect and enhance environmentally sensitive areas, but that's kind of leaning toward natural lands. And a lot of these ranches are a lot of really valuable resources, and they are part of the economy. And then that brings me to a second point, is we don't really address water resources very well. And if you look at the Central Florida Water Initiative, where up around the Orlando area, the 3 water management districts are trying to figure out how to provide water for a expanding population, and they're pretty much out of water up there. They expect that area to grow by as much as 50% in 20 years. And I just don't see how we can continue to give permits for new developments if we don't have enough water for those people. And so Florida already has water shortages, and unless we focus extremely well on how are we going to keep water in our watersheds, the Peace River is already being overtapped, and I just think we're going to have to think about that more distinctly as a society. And so, that's another thing agricultural lands can do, is they can help us hold water when it rains much better than a neighborhood can or something like that. And that's part of our agriculture and water infrastructure. And so I don't think we've really, the future of Florida is really going to be fighting over water, and I think our agricultural lands can help. So that's just kind of a win-win. So I hope we can put something more distinct in there about protecting the agricultural infrastructure and all the things it can help us do.
Thank you for that gap recommendation. I see Penny Taylor, and then Wendy Matthews.
Thank you, Karen. kind of dovetailing on what Paul said, we don't talk about wetlands per se. We talk about natural resources such as water. But wetlands are one of the key areas that we have in Florida to keep us having water. And we also do not address sea level rise, which I think is critical because it's a reality that is before us, and it needs to be woven into our dialogue of all legislation going forward that pertains to development. So I'd like to see those two specific terminologies brought into this, and perhaps even expanded as its own bullet. With sea level rise, you've got salt water coming in and contaminating fresh water. So you've got to, wherever this road goes, it has to respect wetlands, existing wetlands, and hopefully might even enhance them. And also, it cannot contribute to sea level rise by blocking water flow. So I think these are critical parts of our consideration going forward. Thank you.
Great. These are some good big picture suggestions. Wendy, and then Sherry.
Thanks, Karen. And I echo Paul's comments on agriculture. I really think that that is missing in these high-level needs, and layered on top of agriculture, because so much of our study area is primary and secondary Florida panther habitat, one of the most endangered species in the world. I think that needs to be called out a little bit more than just under the term wildlife. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe another bullet that discusses specific considerations, the study area pertaining to Florida panther.
All right. Thank you for that. I'm not seeing any more comments. So just to wrap up, we heard comments on data collection.
Karen?
Yes.
Karen? This is Gary Ritter. I've been trying to raise my hand. I just wanted to take the opportunity to echo Paul's comments as well. He kind of stole my thunder. You know, everything, I can't argue with anything that he said in terms of agriculture. And you know, one of the important things, not only from a recharge standpoint and a habitat standpoint, in keeping those green spaces alive, are some of these, you know, some of these larger tracts of agricultural lands. I think we have talked about in the past, trying to avoid carving them up or splitting them up. So I think, you know, from a water standpoint, a habitat standpoint, and the importance of keeping agricultural whole in our interior sections is extremely important. It should be a high level need.
Okay. And Sherry Ambrose, I lost you for a second. You had a comment.
Thank you. I appreciate the comments being made about agriculture. I guess my suggestion would be that we not forget that agriculture is just one of many targeted industries within this region of the state for economic development purposes. And so, you know, when that language is drafted, that we be careful that we're referencing all of the economic development strategic priorities of the region, perhaps as a whole, rather than calling out just one industry.
Okay, good add-on. Commissioner Taylor, just really briefly so we can move on with the agenda.
Specifically in response to the last comment, agriculture is what ensures us of open space and ensures us of water recharge. We don't get that with a factory with cement. So I do think it's distinguished among the very successful economic industries that we have in Florida, and I'd like it to be highlighted as such. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, you know, great conversation about agriculture. being added as a need. I remember in our previous task force meetings, in order to look at the vitality of agriculture industry, technology plays a big part in it. Thinking about what agriculture needs as it relates to bringing in technology. It makes perfect sense to include agriculture in the needs, high-level needs, because the guiding principles can then get into the conversation about what technology need to be incorporated. So, great points. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you everybody for this feedback. We will include this information. Like, as I said, I was kind of run through the list, but I think you know them, the data, the hurricane dimensions, the technology, the agriculture that we were just talking about, panther, wetlands, water resources, as well as clarifying connectivity and the environmental pieces. So that's just the key highlights of what we'll bring back in July for you to consider. And I apologize, I was facing the wrong way again. So with that, we'll move on. You should be able to hear me better now. Like I said, we'll bring that back in July with refinements, and hopefully that'll get closer to what everybody thinks they should cover. Just as a quick reminder, the public comment period, registration for the public comment period, you must register to be able to make a comment during the public comment portion of today's virtual meeting. We've enhanced the approach for the public to comment period to be more in line with in-person meetings, and requests to comment may now be made until 11 a.m. today. It's another half hour or so, and will be addressed in those requests received will be addressed during the public comment period in the order they were received. If you've not yet registered to provide public comment during today's virtual meeting and wish to do so, please sign up on the website under today's event. If you need the link emailed to you, this is one time, public can please raise your hand function, and one of our team members will email you the link to sign up. Comments can be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. So thank you. With that, we're going to switch over to talk more about how the high-level needs relate to guiding principles. The task force, we will have discussion after each set of guiding principles, so you can use your hand raise function again. And I'm going to turn it over to Beth Kegel to walk through this section.
Thank you, Karen, and good morning, everyone. We'd like to now show you some examples of guiding principles and instructions, as Karen just mentioned. In Weiwei's presentation, guiding principles were described as core values that guide decisions about corridor and regional planning development. They are the how and are intended to be short statements supported by technical notes where needed. Instructions were described as directions provided by the task force for future project development and implementation activities to ensure that guiding principles are applied as intended. These would be more specific, of course. We don't have time to cover all the guiding principles today, but we've selected 4 examples based on topics that you've been discussing in recent meetings to start making some progress. The example guiding principles are in the 4 subject areas that you see on the screen. As a follow-up to the 2 recent webinars, we'll discuss the use of technology and broadband connectivity, and we will discuss transportation connectivity and the natural environment. These topics were chosen to start the robust discussions that are warranted for the task force to come to agreement on recommendations and report content. So let's first start with the use of technology. As you heard in webinar 2, there are a number of emerging technologies that can bring benefits to the corridor and to the surrounding communities. What you see here are just a few examples of how a connected corridor can enable traffic management and environmental preservation, health and safety applications, and real-time data for cost-efficient infrastructure maintenance. There are also opportunities for innovative uses of the right-of-way, as well as energy efficiencies. Leveraging technological innovations allows for a greater return on investment through a future embracing approach. Let's take a look at a guiding principle based on some of the discussions that you, the task force, has had regarding emerging technologies. We begin with a draft high-level needs statement based on task force dialogue. So here you see, prepare for emerging and future technologies, such as for vehicles, and enhanced operational and maintenance capabilities. These relate to a purpose statement that you saw before in the virtual meeting, leverage technology. This draft guiding principle, which relates to the stated need, is implement technology-ready infrastructure to provide state-of-the-art and energy-efficient technologies, materials, and methodologies. Draft instructions for Fdot, informed by this guiding principle, could be design in anticipation of connected and autonomous vehicles, provide access to electric vehicle charging, consider innovative uses of right-of-way for transportation and community purposes, and employ technologies for effective corridor management, such as avoiding wildlife crossings. So let's enter into some dialogue. Karen?
Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just leave at the wheel there for a second.
No problem.
So we're going to open this up to task force members, and we want to understand if there are any questions of clarification, as well as like to get your thoughts on the guiding principle language as shown. Does it represent the conversation the task force has had so far, or is anything that raised significant concern or should be added related to this high-level need going forward under the leverage technology perspective? So task force members, once again, you can raise your hands to make any comments. I see Gary Ritter. Gary, you want to start us off?
Actually, I did not have, I thought I had my hand down, but I didn't have any comment right now.
Okay.
Do I have my hand up or?
It's down now.
Okay.
Shannon Estenos?
Yeah, just a quick question about under the draft instructions. Can you clarify an example of technology that avoids wildlife crossings? Avoids wildlife crossings?
Will or LK, do you want to jump in? Or one of us to address that?
So Shannon, this is LK. There are technologies out there which actually detect wildlife as they approach a particular conflict area. There was a test project that we did in our district a few years ago, and it was pretty effective as it relates to detecting the wildlife. But that technology has grown so much, and it's taken leaps and bounds. So there are several examples similar to the one that we used in District 1. I think the one that we used was in Collier County along US 41.
So I think maybe it's just a problem with the wording here, because I think what you really mean is such as avoiding wildlife vehicular conflict or wildlife mortality or wildlife. You don't, do you get my meaning? I mean, a wildlife, to avoid a wildlife crossing, don't put the road there. You know what I mean? That's the way you avoid wildlife crossings. But I think what you're talking about is technology that reduces wildlife mortality or wildlife impacts or something.
Great point, Shannon. I think definitely change in language is needed there, because you would want to use wildlife crossings to protect wildlife,
right,
in addition to the technology that we're talking about. Yeah, great point.
Right, thank you.
Elizabeth Fleming and then Penny Taylor. Elizabeth?
Yes, just a follow-up to that. The technology that the secretary was referring to on US 41 at Turner River and Big Cypress has been an utter failure. It has not worked. And for many years, there's been an effort to either replace the system there, put something entirely different. It has not worked. So until the technology itself is improved, it has not been proven to be reliable in Florida.
Thank you for that clarification, Elizabeth. Penny?
Thank you. Perhaps a suggestion that under draft high-level needs, we need to incorporate the emerging and future technologies such as vehicles or effective wildlife protection technology, so that we incorporate early on the fact that this road needs to protect wildlife, and that when you put new roads in, I mean, it's inferred that, you know, I don't think animals can identify a road in that, and especially a new road, they usually travel together in a way that's repetitive. So I think if we somehow, after purpose, incorporate some kind of wording that addresses that we need to prepare for additional wildlife crossings or a technology to advance the protection of wildlife when a road is constructed, I would make that suggestion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think that's all the comments that we have from the task force. So Beth, shall we move on to another guiding principle?
Sure. So let's move on to another guiding principle under the subject of broadband connectivity. So here's an example of how data in the GIS tool may illustrate needs as well as opportunities. These maps, which you've seen before, show broadband speeds and population density, so they should look familiar to you. You can see areas of low broadband speeds compared with areas of lower population densities. An opportunity could be identified to provide access to higher speeds in these areas. Further, there may be efficiencies involved in co-locating broadband utilities with existing roadways shown in the red and blue on the map. Another example you've seen before, for this pictured corridor, you can see how utilities and broadband can be co-located in the right-of-way with multiple conduits supporting a dig once philosophy. Now that we've looked at examples of needs and opportunities that could be presented by the project, let's look at a guiding principle based on the task force discussions you've had at prior meetings. So what you see here is a continuation of what was presented near the end of webinar 3. Again, this has been aligned with the purpose categories included in the statute, and you can see a few of them there. There are a few draft high-level needs captured from past discussions that may relate to the subject of broadband connectivity. So shown here are: help rural and underserved areas improve infrastructure and connectivity for people, freight, and information; enhance access to jobs, education, healthcare, and goods and services; and help inland and rural areas increase economic activity and economic diversity. A resulting guiding principle could be to plan and design enhanced or new corridors to enable co-location of broadband infrastructure in right-of-way, and ensure broadband provider access to Fdot right-of-way is non-discriminatory and competitively neutral. Here is a fairly comprehensive set of example instructions for Fdot, which include: prioritize connections to community anchor institutions, maximize co-location opportunities, for example, add conduit or dig once, enhance transportation and infrastructure planning processes, and leverage partnerships with providers to provide for smaller communities. So Karen?
So it's back to the task force again. We've talked quite a bit about broadband. So this is an opportunity to ask if there are any questions related to this, or if there's anything that would raise significant concern for you, anything missing. So if the task force members want to raise their hand. I do want to point out that some of these instructions are not necessarily only for FDOT. They could be instructions that are carried out by other partners as well. So, or in partnership. So, Shannon Estenos?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, but could you go back one slide? I needed to focus on the photograph. So what are we looking at here? What is this? Is this an example of what DOT considers co-locating with existing right-of-way?
Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Shannon. This is Marlon. Yeah, that will be an example of, hi, this will be an example of trying to collocate different elements on a corridor. Yes. And
So
show some of the components. Yeah, go ahead.
So in other words, this is an example where you have 2 lanes. You're adding 2 additional lanes, but DOT considers that an existing roadway, even though you have an additional 2 additional lanes. I'm just asking for clarification.
This is just a theoretical example of just showing how we can try to collocate utilities, broadband on a facility. It's just an example.
Okay, so then if we can fast forward back to the slide we were just on. So I had asked a question during the broadband presentation and I was told that this is the place that we would do this in the guiding principles, which is how does prioritizing existing corridors get folded into statements about these other needs? And you know what I'm seeing in a draft guiding principle here is no prioritization on existing corridors. In fact, the guiding principle, which I'm assuming will stand alone, says plan and design enhanced or new corridors. So the concern certainly that I think others have been raising for months now, we're getting down to guiding principles. The concern we've raised about new roadways, new corridors, brand new big highways running through Florida's last remaining open spaces and natural areas. This is exactly what I was concerned about 7 or 8 months ago, was that we would get down to guiding principles and they would be parsed out, and existing roadway and new roadway would essentially have the same priority. So I just want to lodge my own personal, I'll just repeat it, which is that existing roadways should have priority, and that guiding principle should thread through all of the rest of the needs areas. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Shannon, that was a great point. At your task force meeting in July, we're going to bring back a more comprehensive set of guiding principles for you to review. Today, we picked a few examples, and this one is on broadband, but the existing facilities prioritization of that is more overarching than just the broadband discussion. So we'll bring back a draft for you guys to review.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to add is I think when it came to broadband, we've mostly heard that broadband is important on existing, enhanced, and new. So that I think that gets to it, and that's adjustments can potentially be made. Other comments from the task force? Okay, seeing none, we're gonna Beth move into some more guiding principles.
Okay, Karen, so now that we've discussed broadband connectivity, let's move on to transportation connectivity. So again, these 2 maps should look familiar to you as well from the GIS tool. These are reflecting airport and hospital medical facility locations throughout the region. Also, population density is overlaid onto both of the maps. So if improving on the use of airports is a priority, utilizing the project to enhance transportation connectivity for people and freight businesses could be an opportunity. Additionally, if the data shows that residents in certain parts of the region have limited or inefficient access to medical facilities, an opportunity may exist to improve on this access. Here's a further example of an opportunity of connecting airports. The vision for Everglades International Airport, located in Clewiston, is to become a major cargo hub between the US and Latin America. In order to assist the airport in realizing this vision, perhaps there's some connectivity options that could be provided to enhance the movement of goods into and out of the area. Related to transportation connectivity, here is a start for your discussion purposes, again, taken from prior discussions of the task force. Above are draft high-level needs that have already been highlighted based on task force dialogue in past meetings. Improve highway limited access interregional connectivity for residents, freight, and visitors between existing communities and external markets, and help rural and underserved areas improve infrastructure and connectivity for people, freight, and information. As a task force, you've discussed guiding principles that enhance transportation connectivity by emphasizing linkages to existing communities and the existing regional roadway network consistent with regional and local plans. Example instructions for Fdot in this case could be to prioritize interchange locations for state roads and work with local governments to identify opportunities to improve or create connections to existing communities, focusing on land use consistency, economic development plans, and interchange management plans. So let's open this up for dialogue.
To get into some conversations that we haven't had in a while. So I'm going to open it up to task force members once again to ask if there's anything for clarification. Your thought on the guiding principle language. Does it reflect the conversations the task force has had to date? Is there anything that raises significant concern or is missing? And just to remind you that we will come back with more guiding principles at task force meeting number 6, actually all of the guiding principles in this same kind of format. Following up on the last conversation, there is an existing guiding principle on prioritizing existing facilities. So that will come back in the same kind of layout, and then we could talk about it as a group at task force meeting number 6. So questions or comments on the transportation connectivity? Oh, lots of good ones here. I'm going to start with Don Scott.
Can we change the prioritized interchange locations for state roads just to major east-west roads or something else? Because not knowing exactly where we're going, I don't want to preclude something that's a major county road.
Okay, I appreciate you jumping right into the instructions. Any thoughts on the guiding principle, or is that acceptable as is?
I think the only other thing I would add to that is I understand we're enhancing access for the rural community, but we can also improve conditions for the urban area from a needs standpoint.
Okay. All right, then I'm going to open it up to Elizabeth Fleming. Elizabeth?
Yes. It's not specifically about the transportation connectivity, but I have thought the same thing for the last couple. Do we have a copy of this slide in previous packets? Or if we don't, I would like to get this, because this helps me formulate the way that we need to think about this and to in the drafting of these. This is very clear, kind of step by step. Would task force members be able to get a copy of this? And you had said that we'll get a more specific outline at the next meeting, but I found that very helpful as well as we think about the next really important fleshing this out going forward from here. This is very helpful to me.
Wei, do you want to answer?
Elizabeth, that's a great point to help us organize the next for materials for the next meeting. If you find this format being very informative, we'll organize everything in this format. It might be a big, huge spreadsheet, but we'll try to get that to you before the meeting.
And also let me add that Elizabeth and everyone on the call, this information is also on the website as of today. So you can go back and see this structure after we conclude here.
Yeah, it's under the events page. So you should be able to see it that way.
What did you say, Karen? It's on the what page?
If you go to the events page and events page under the task force and look at past events, will be passed tomorrow, then you'll find them there.
Hey, Elizabeth, this is LK. Are you asking for us to use this similar format and have it available for you guys to review before the task force meeting number 6 for conversation? Is that your ask?
I think it would be helpful to me. I don't know if this is, speaking for myself, I've been struggling with how to write a guiding principle and have been told over and over that that is where the commitments come in from FDOT and how very important they are. And I've had trouble thinking about a guiding principle, how to write one, how to structure it, how to get the content in the principle to meaningfully express what I want to. And this chart is helping me organize my thought process. That's all I'm suggesting.
All right, thank you. Glad to hear it. Don, I think you still have your hand up. You responded. Pat Steed, I can call on you. Pat, did you have a thought to share? There you go.
Yes, this is just a follow-up to Don's comment. This is great. This really reflects the input that we've certainly provided previously at meetings. But I think to address Don's thing, what we've talked about over time is whatever our regional roadway network is, the connectivity to that, because every single county or MPO, and we're all in MPOs, have their own regional roadway network. And some of those are state roads, the majority, but a few of them are not. So I think if we just change that from state roads to that, what's reflected in the regional roadway connectivity.
All right, thank you for the clarification. Penny Taylor, and then Paul Cray.
Yes, hi. I think I had the same concern with under the draft instructions when I read prioritize interchange locations for state roads. It almost sounds like this is the spine of the whole new system going to be created by FDOT to create new state roads. So I think somehow I don't think that's your intention, but I think if we could reword that a little bit so that we understand the meaning, your intentions, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Paul Gray.
Hi, thank you. This is Paul. Yeah, I'd struggle with guiding principles too. And when I look at this one, the draft guiding principle says enhanced transportation connectivity. At a previous meeting, we had some projections on the suitability of these roads going into the future, and like Highway 17 was predicted to be pretty much at an acceptable level of service clear to the year 2015. And, you know, thinking about the stretch of 17 that I drive relatively often between Wauchula and Arcadia, it's 4-lane. It's not very busy. It's fine. And so enhanced kind of sounds like we need to do something, or we're supposed to do something. And to me, it would be a better word would be evaluate transportation connectivity. And if we don't need to do anything, if the road's fine, then we'd say, okay, this place is good. Let's move on and try to find, you know, problem spots. And so just some of these words that tend to say you're supposed to do something, I think we need to evaluate it first. And then if we evaluate it and it's inadequate, then we would try to figure out what to do. But you know, I'm not trying to be oversensitive, but I just think that word kind of is a leading word and evaluate first before we do any enhancements. So thank you.
That's great. So just so I'm clear, would two steps or two parts to this: evaluate and then enhance as appropriate?
Yeah.
acceptable?
We evaluate first, and if there is a need, then you do something. But telling us that kind of says we need to do something before we have actually really checked to see if there's a need.
Okay. Any other thoughts from any of our local government partners, or in particular that have are concerned about access to communities or anything? So I'm going to call on Chris Constance first, and then Shannon. Chris?
I am unmuted.
Yes, we hear you.
Wonderful. All right. So my comment was, in looking at, how just holistically at how things are going from south to north, it seems like in my mind there's sort of a fork in the road when it comes to this connectivity issue and in relating with economic support for the regions. In order to get this pipeline, if it gets built, to go sort of north, and in my mind, northwest kind of makes more sense because you have sort of an end zone that you're looking for. But at the same time, I don't feel that leaving the central part of the state out is a good idea, because this is such a vast geography. It really may make sense to look at the possibilities of kind of a fork in the road. Because I think when you get to the northern terminus of 29 and you're trying to kind of make a decision what direction to go, I think you kind of have to go both ways. Because if you're looking at, again, the end terminus, northwest makes more sense, but the concept of Everglades and all of the other things that are occurring mid-state are important, and it could be an option for evacuation and so forth to bleed off from the Southwest Florida area to come across Alligator Alley, go up 29, but then head mid-state. And then you have a vast network with 27 that's already been, it's not a toll road certainly, but it certainly is a 4-lane highway, which could be reverse flowed. So if we're talking about evacuation, so I'm going to start throwing that concept out now, because there may not be just one direction to go, and it may involve doing a little bit more in a certain, in a duality concept for a portion of the state. Because I think once you get all the way mid-state going to the northeast, now you're not effectively creating something that makes a lot of sense to then have to head all the way back to the Tampa Bay area. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Good, thanks. Any reactions from task force members or anyone else? Shannon, I had seen you with your hand up before. You're good now, I take it?
No. I put it back up, Karen. Sorry, because I have a related question to the hurricane evacuation. Is there a specific guide? I won't ask it now if there's a specific guiding principle related to hurricane evacuation. I'm sorry?
I'm drawing a blank. So if there's, I imagine there's a specific principle related to hurricane evacuation, but we'll have to look. It may be just tied in with other things. So
Well, okay.
One way or the other, what's your point behind asking?
I'll make it now, and if it's more appropriate later, I'll make it again.
That's right. Go ahead.
Yeah, that there should be a specific draft guiding principle related to hurricane evacuation. And I think what it needs is it needs to be informed by the kind of specificity that we just heard from Mr. Constance. I think that, and this is kind of the point I was trying to make earlier, which is that hurricane evacuation, our approach to hurricane evacuation in a state like ours, which is this linear state, everybody's heading generally in the same direction when they're trying to evacuate. We have to understand who governs our hurricane evacuation approach, and how do the decisions that this agency makes, Florida DOT, how does it knit together with how local governments are planning for hurricane evacuation? And I don't feel like we've given it the amount of attention on this task force that it deserves I did raise it, I think, at the very first task force meeting last fall. I do think that, you know, early data you guys shared with us, for example, for 24-hour, 36-hour, 48-hour clearance times didn't seem right to me. I asked for several months for where that data came from, and I was told it came from DEO, but I wasn't really given a site as to where that data came from. It's critical that whatever is done in this MCORS process does not extend hurricane evacuation clearance times, not just on day one of the corridor, but for the life of the corridor. And so the agency really needs to be planning. You build a road for 30 years or 50 years, whatever the planning horizon is. And I think we've got to commit at the beginning that hurricane clearance times will be maintained for the life of that facility. So that's, to me, needs its own guiding principle.
Shannon, thanks for the great comment. I think we do need to recognize the multifaceted approach to dealing with hurricanes, whether we evacuate, whether shelter in place for some communities, and a guiding principle should be developed for this corridor we're planning for the state for the long term. So we need to look into the long term, how we plan our facilities that would support what the local communities are doing during a hurricane situation. So great points. We'll come back with some draft language for you to review.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, Shannon, we would have, this as well, we would have done it sooner. Just, you know, some of the staff that we were going to call on are certainly tied up right now, but like Wei said, we're going to get it back on the agenda.
Appreciate it, thanks.
And then Chris Constance, I think, had a follow-up, and then we're.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Karen. I guess it has not to do with the hurricane evacuation concept, but just wanted to know if resiliency was going to be addressed in the guiding principles, because, and I see head nods already, because I really think it's important. Again, this is the concept. I think we have to be thinking in two spheres. One is the current and direct need for these roads, which may not be very apparent, but that's what we're sort of addressing in a lot of what we're talking about today. But I'm thinking about the 50-year window and the event horizon when we really do have issues with sea level rise and coastal communities don't make a whole lot of sense, and that we're going to drive development inward, because otherwise we're going to have a dramatic loss of property values, and you know, potential economic hardship in this state if we just continue to drive development only in coastal zones. And so I think if we do, and it's the road is one side of things, but really it's up to local government to make sure that each county provides for proper restrictions on development that is not dealing with, you know, proper you know, elements that you always have to look at. You've got to look at water and flows and all of the things that are concerned for the environmental groups. But you know, it really comes down to local governments doing the right thing. And you know, we try every day in Charlotte County to do the right thing and make sure that development is correct. So putting these corridors in doesn't mean that there's going to be rampant growth and all kinds of environmental problems. That's going to be up to the local governments and those elected officials to be responsible about what they're doing. But we have to look at that 50-year window and realize that our coastal communities are not safe and are not going to be sustainable. So I want to know where that's going to be put into all this.
Commissioner, resiliency is a topic that Will and I are working very hard on within the department. We've developed a resiliency policy that asked us to collaborate with local governments when we develop and maintain our transportation infrastructure. It's a big part of the MCORS program. So great comments. We'll, when we have the more comprehensive list of the guiding principles, resiliency is certainly a big part. It's an overarching theme for everything we do. And Will, I think you have.
Yeah, I think what has evolved over the last few years is that the department has put resiliency as a priority. So that'll coincide with the MCORS vision. So it's a very important topic. We both agree.
Chris, I'll give you one last follow-up, and then we'll move on to the
No,
next set.
I just wanted to thank the staff for those comments. Thank you.
Okay, great. And some people have their have themselves unmuted still, so you may want to check that going forward. So with that, we'll go to the fourth set, guiding principles for today.
Okay, thank you everyone for the great discussion. So let's turn our attention now to the natural environment. For data related to the natural environment, here are two of the avoidance areas that you have seen in the GIS tool. Example opportunities shown here are to preserve existing conservation lands, as well as the opportunity to acquire new lands as part of the project for additional preservation. Other opportunities, we can go to the next slide. There we go. Other opportunities include working with the Panther Recovery Implementation Team, or PRIT, which is comprised of Fdot staff, permitting agency representatives, and representatives from various non-governmental organizations to determine priorities of conservation land purchases to ensure that wildlife crossings could be proposed in areas identified to be hotspots for Panther vehicle collisions within the study area. This draft high-level need states protect and enhance environmentally sensitive areas, wildlife and natural resources such as water, and improve connectivity. There are a few draft guiding principles shown on the slide which prioritize avoidance and enhancement of conserved natural resources, such as avoid existing lands managed for conservation purposes, avoid lands proposed for management for conservation purposes. Where avoidance is not feasible, minimize and mitigate impacts on these lands, and enhance lands managed for conservation purposes where feasible. Here, Fdot is instructed to avoid existing conservation areas to the maximum extent feasible, while also leveraging Senate Bill 7068 acquisition authority to preserve additional land for the net benefit of natural resource preservation. So let's start the dialogue.
Thank you, Beth. So as noted, these are some of the natural resource principles that will be coming back to the task force. We did want to get your same sort of feedback that we've been hearing before so that we can make adjustments and bring it back with the full set. You see, we've kind of brought some that were meant to spur some discussion. So once again, are there any questions for clarifications? Any thoughts on the guiding principle language as it is shown? And then is there anything that you have a significant concern with? So I'm going to open it up to the task force again to speak on this. Ask questions, or perhaps you're reading through them still. Brian Starker, do you want to start us off? Brian Starker, do you have a comment?
There we go. I was having difficulty with my mute button. So just want to make sure that when we're talking about avoid existing lands managed, or some of our conservation lands aren't actively managed, at least by the agencies. So I just want to make sure that we're talking about lands that are under conservation easement as well. So there would be fee and less than fee, because we're not necessarily actively, the agencies aren't necessarily actively managing conservation easement lands.
Is that, oh, sorry.
Elizabeth, I'll let
So
you follow up.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're talking about lands owned both in fee and less than fee on those portions of the guiding principles.
And I just wanted to add to that. I think that terminology might come from FNA, and lands managed for conservation purposes does include conservation easements. And I think that's where this came from, but we should confirm.
Hi, Elizabeth. We're going to confirm all that. Thank you for your comment. Yes.
Thank you.
I think I saw Pat Steed's hand up. That maybe disappeared. Elizabeth?
Yeah, that, I believe that's absolutely correct. That's the definition of it. And that would be my understanding, managed by any and all people that might do so for that purpose.
And just a reminder, folks, that you know, we can verify, but we can also take recommendations. So as you make comments, make recommendations of what you want to see.
Regarding that, then my recommendation would be is just make it abundantly clear this is to include fee and less than fee lands.
Thank you, Brian. Elizabeth?
I guess I have a question about the guiding principle. Is that all one guiding principle, or are those principles that come out of the previously identified need? Because are those 4 different principles?
Yes, those are 4 different principles. Correct.
So for the third one about avoidance, if avoidance is not feasible, then minimize and mitigate. Because I would have added enhance as well, but then there is the separate one for enhanced lands managed for conservation purposes where feasible. Does that mean that we should look to enhance the lands throughout, or only if they're going to be impacted?
What would you suggest? As a task force, this is a task force, you know, guiding principle. For clarification, what would you like to suggest be said?
I guess what I'm getting at, and I need to think about it more, is I would want to see enhancement if avoidance is not feasible, rather than have that minimize and mitigate these lands. I would include enhancement in that one as also within the third one, and then have it be separate as well. Since enhancement has been, it's been explained that enhancement is I don't know what the word, a cornerstone to this effort, or it is an important aspect to this effort, and it's in the legislation.
Yeah, Elizabeth, thank you for clarifying. I see what you're saying. It's when avoidance is not feasible, we need to minimize, mitigate, and enhance, and then also have a separate guiding principle to enhance lands managed for conservation purposes where feasible. So we get that.
Thank you, Wei, because I didn't explain that very clearly, but that is what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
And I think you're trying to also say is enhancement needs to be prioritized if we do impact, right?
Maybe you could say that again, Will. I didn't hear you.
just with options of when we can't avoid, what do we need to prioritize? And I think Elizabeth was trying to allude that enhancement needs to be prioritized.
How about any comments from our local partners, transportation partners, the economic or colleges? I don't know if everyone's waiting for task force meeting number 6 when they get to see them all, but we really expected quite a bit of discussion on this, or some thoughts on what people might say. So, does this mean that they're, you know, with the adjustments that have been mentioned so far, you know, the prioritizing, that people are generally comfortable with this guiding principle language and this high level need?
Yeah, Karen, this is Shannon. I somehow lost the actual screen on my computer, so I'm not looking at it. For me, my part, I'm not ready to say I'm generally comfortable with any of these guiding principles at this point until I see the whole body of them. So I wouldn't interpret my current, I'm just speaking for myself, my current sort of silence on this as comfort, but rather just digesting and, you know, looking forward to a more comprehensive conversation at the next meeting, I think.
Shannon, thank you for that clarification. This is a starting point for us to look at some sample guiding principles at our task force meeting number 6 in July. We're going to have a more comprehensive list of the guiding principles, and then we're going to try to gauge your acceptance level of them, you know, so we can separate out the ones that we can generally agree on, and also identify that the ones that we need to spend more time on. So we're not assuming that you're agreeing with anything at this point. We'll have lots of time for discussion back and forth in July.
That's helpful. I do, but now that I found the screen on my desktop again, one of the things I guess remains an issue, and I think what you're telling me is that we're going to talk about this per Marlon's presentation earlier, is the map, the fact that Everglades National Park is still included in the I forget the color it's in, and there'll be an opportunity to continue to talk about that, right? Because there's an argument to be made to put it in a different color. I think there's an opportunity for that later, and that's related to these guiding principles because of where it lands on the map. Thank you very much.
Exactly. For meeting number 6, we have time budgeted for the discussion about the avoidance and attraction layers, because that sort of sets the backdrop for your guiding principle discussions. So great point.
Thanks.
I see Tamara Sagagawa has raised her hand to make a comment. Tamara?
Thanks, Karen. Just to make sure that I understand correctly, in advance of the 6th meeting, you'll be sharing, I guess, slides in this format with members of the task force so they can be prepared for a discussion. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Tamara, this is LK. So the feedback that we received from previous task force meetings was, like Elizabeth said, how the needs connect to the guiding principles and how the guiding principles will kind of direct or give instructions for us to follow through when we complete or go through our planning and PD&E studies. So we prepared this format so that we can provide that clarity, and I'm glad we got a very positive feedback on this particular format. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the high level needs all the needs that were generated by the task force and all the guiding principles that were previously generated by or developed by the task force. And we're going to put them in this format and send them out to the task force so that you would be able to review them, kind of like collect your thoughts, comments, and then when you get to the task force meeting number 6, we'll have a conversation on what refinements need to be made. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
So are there any other task force members, or I was going to say maybe Will or Weiwei, if there's something else that you wanted to touch on that we maybe skipped that should have touched on? So it seems we have more discussion.
No, today's exercise was just trying to get everybody engaged in, what the end goal is, and trying to just start that conversation again about guiding principles. I do appreciate the comments back on this format. The team has worked hard to try to come up with a plan and a way forward of how to describe what the end product needs to look like. So format wise, and then receive your content so we can craft that where everyone can live with. So I appreciate the comments today and hope to have a more robust discussion in the next meeting.
Yeah, I would like to thank the task force members for the robust feedback today, giving us instructions as to what we need to do to revise the guiding principles and the instructions. But just keep in mind that the relationship between the purpose, the high level needs, it's not a one-on-one correlation to the guiding principles and the draft instructions. So if you could give staff some flexibility in organizing this in a way that's concise and comprehensible for you, we'll try to get something out to you before your next meeting.
Next slide, please.
All right. Hey, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Marlon, Beth, Will, and Weiwei for the conversation and responses to the task force members. And I want to say thank you to all the task force members for the engaged conversation and the feedback that you provided to this new format that we presented to you to kind of connect the whole process, right? Before we go to the public comments, I'd like to recap a few of the next steps before first, today's meeting, today's presentation and the virtual meeting recording will be posted on the website. Second, we will continue to be available to address any technical questions you have throughout the process. Finally, we will be in touch as soon as we have solidified the timing and format of the July meetings. We did mention the date and the location of the meeting and the hybrid format, so we'll provide more details on that. So this concludes our formal presentation for today. Now let's move on to the public comment period of our virtual meeting and hear comments from members of the public who are in the virtual meeting with us today. I want to continue to emphasize how important this input is to the process, and that public comment during our meetings is not the only way for public to provide their input to us. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. Let us now hear comments from the public, members of the public who signed up to comment or present at the virtual meeting today. Karen?
Thank you, LK. So thank you. We'll now go into the public comment period. It's expected to last approximately 30 minutes. As always, we encourage everyone to stay engaged during this portion of the virtual meeting. We've enhanced the approach to the public comment period to be more in line with in-person meetings, and requests that were received by 11 p.m. today will be addressed during the public comment period in the order they were received. If you do not respond when you are called, we will give you a second chance at the end of the public comment period in case you took a quick break. When your name is called to actually speak, we will unmute your line in order for you to provide comments within your allotted time of 3 minutes. You will hear a tone when you have 30 seconds remaining and another tone when your time is up. The line will be muted after 3 minutes, so please keep your eye on the clock and listen for the tones. If you have more information to share with the group, you can provide additional comments in writing for further consideration, sending these comments anytime to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us. Only one person at a time will be unmuted. If you have self-muted, please be sure to unmute before speaking. And now I'm going to identify the first 3 speakers so that you can be prepared. Lindsey Cross from St. Petersburg, Herman Younger from Gainesville, and Eugene Kelly from Brooksville. So first up is Lindsey Cross.
Good morning. This is Lindsey Cross with Florida Conservation Voters. I first want to acknowledge that we are living in unusual times and we're all trying to navigate how to operate safely and effectively. So I will recognize some of the modifications that you, DOT staff and consultants made to the webinar format today. However, the format was disjointed and it appears that task force members are still quite unclear about their roles and the actual ability to influence the final report recommendations, especially related to the need for consensus. Aggressively continuing with the webinars and task force meetings at this time is not sufficient for receiving feedback from the task force and community members in a meaningful way, nor is it appropriate for advancing an issue that will so severely impact our economic, physical, and community landscape for decades to come. So today I would like to ask you as DOT staff and consultants, if you truly believe that you're doing the best that you can to involve the public in this process, not just in terms of quantity, but in terms of the quality of their engagement. It is your job, DOT, to conduct this process in a way that conforms with the sunshine requirements, as we have previously reminded you in reference to the letter from the First Amendment Foundation. I'd also argue that you should be going above and beyond the letter of the law to seek ways to build trust within the communities. Instead, your action shows that you are still not sensitive to some of these global and current priorities. We know from the verbal comments received at in-person meetings and on these webinars that the public is overwhelmingly against building these roads. We have a pretty good idea of what the thousands of emails to DOT Listens have said, and that is to not build the roads. But that is only because concerned organizations have made public records requests using the Freedom of Information Act. And just on Monday, the Center for Biological Diversity made another records request for public comments from February through this month. You alluded to the fact that task force members may receive these comments in February, but there has been no meaningful attempt to collate and categorize these in a way that is accessible and digestible to the public. One member of the public on a recent webinar referred to this email portal as a black hole. So while it may be enough to set up this space, I believe that you should be doing more than the bare minimum. Also, for members of the public interested in attending this meeting, they would not have received electronic notice of this until 5 p.m. on Saturday evening. The agenda was not provided until Monday, making it exceedingly difficult for the public to be informed and prepared to deliver thoughtful comments. Even task force members had little knowledge beforehand of the exact content of this meeting. We have significant priorities in our state right now, and I believe that this process should be put on hold until those needs are sufficiently met. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cross, for your comment. Up next, Herman Younger.
Hello, my name is Herman Younger. I'm an organizing representative for the Sierra Club based in Gainesville, Florida. Task force members, we find ourselves in unprecedented times of great uncertainty. Businesses are suffering, and our healthcare and education industries are lacking adequate funding and resources as a result of COVID-19. As task force members, you represent some of these very sectors that are in serious need of government assistance. I ask you today to act with your consciousness and urge Governor DeSantis to strike the $90 million in funding for MCORs from the 2020-21 budget so that funding can be redirected to help the unemployed, small businesses, agricultural producers and workers, and other Floridians hit hard by COVID-19 and its repercussions. Our essential industries and services cannot afford to suffer due to the funding of this destructive, unnecessary toll road project. Please act with urgency and make your position against this waste of taxpayer dollars known to the public today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Younger, for your comment. Up next, Eugene Kelly from Brooksville, Florida. Eugene, you are unmuted.
Thank you, and good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Gray and the several other task force members who began the meeting by shining a light on the importance of agriculture to this region. And important also, you alluded to its importance in maintaining watersheds and hydrologic function across the study area. The environmental and economic significance of conservation and agricultural lands is reflected in much of the spatial data and the interactive maps that were developed for MCORs and to be considered by task force members. Those data include approved Florida Forever project areas, rural and family land project areas, a lot of the habitat required by imperiled plant and animal species. Nearly all those land areas coincide with privately owned agricultural land. Same is true of the ecological greenways network. We know agriculture is going to be critical to maintaining ecological connectivity across the region. Native Plant Societies encourage the consideration of these data by all three task forces since the inception of this process, but we think there's other data that reflects the importance of agriculture to the natural resources and economy of your study area. We believe Farm Bill supported projects are another source of information that should be folded into your decision making. Through such programs as the Wetland Reserve Program, Wildlife Habitat Improvement Program, the Agriculture Conservation Easement Program, and conservation technical assistance provided to agricultural landowners. The Farm Bill over the course of decades has invested billions of taxpayer dollars to maintain or enhance agricultural productivity, the habitat values, and the sustainability of agricultural land. Farm Bill spending in Florida totaled $86 million in 2019, and that qualifies as a somewhat lean year. Over the 15 years since 2005, more than $1.9 billion, or an average of $127 million a year, has been invested to support and improve agriculture in Florida. Those figures don't break down spending by county, but I'm working to compile that information and share it with you in the future. We believe the large land area encompassed by agriculture in your study area means that Farm Bill spending will be correspondingly significant within your region. In the same way, your guiding principles appear aimed at minimizing impacts to our investments in land conservation. We believe the billions invested in support of agriculture and the locations where those investments have taken place across your study area should also be considered in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Up next is Amy Datz from Tallahassee, Florida. Amy, you are unmuted.
I have been a professional environmental scientist for over 40 years. My area of expertise is air pollution and green engineering for transit design. I'm an activist, not a lobbyist or consultant. Two issues I have not heard discussed are the cost of congestion and the design of the connectivity between these three road segments. Study the cost-benefit analysis of how much savings there will be, not only in movement of goods and people, well, after all, time is money, but also in the reduction in medical costs if the air pollution is reduced through reduction in traffic congestion and increased internet connectivity. Study major areas of congestion and determine the best alignment that will provide the maximum reduction in congestion statewide. Studies show currently the connection with the Suncoast and I-4 and I-75 are some of the worst congested areas in the nation and need improvement. Please design the connection between these three project corridors to maximize efficient connection to each other and to the existing system. Do not design the northern terminus of the Southwest corridor to dump traffic onto I-4 and have the southern terminus of the Suncoast also dump traffic on I-4, creating more congestion on I-4. There must be an option to exit on I-4, but not force traffic on I-4 to connect these two roadways. Make these two new roads contiguous. Design the connectivity of the Northern Turnpike directly to the current turnpike as an efficient continuous connection, also connecting it to the other two new corridor roads. The current turnpike dumps traffic onto I-75. This traffic design should avoid forcing traffic onto I-75 to connect to this new turnpike extension. The trucking industry loses $5 billion a year in congestion, passing that cost on to all Floridians. It is an industry that must be a partner in planning ways to move and store their trucks with congestion reduction as a priority. Avoid areas where endangered wildlife habitat will be compromised. Study roadkill statistics to identify where wildlife crossings will be most effective. Provide wildlife crossing videos to the public on your website so they will better understand how they save wildlife. When I moved to Florida in 1974, there were 20 panthers. Today, there are over 220 panthers. Some part of that success can be attributed to limited access roadway and well-planned wildlife crossings. Fdot has already won many national and international awards for their work in this area. The great threat to the panther is the invasive 17-foot pythons competing for their food source and seismic testing to frack of the Big Cypress, not this new roadway. Sea level rise must be a layer in your analysis, with the temperature predicted as over 100 degrees for the next 2 weeks in the Arctic Circle. This is an important level of analysis to be considered in these corridor projects. I'm over 65 years old. The webinars are the only way I can participate in these meetings without jeopardizing my life. Please plan both in-person and web-connected meetings in the future.
Thank you, Mrs. Datz. Up next, Sally Ann Collins from Morriston, Florida. Sally, you are unmuted.
Yes, I've agreed with all those speakers that are coming on. And this time, although I'm living up in Morriston and I'm more concerned with the northern end of this fiascos, I think agriculture is vitally important. Evacuation during hurricanes, I believe you need to hunker down in your own home, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins. Up next, Gary Stillwell from Alva, Florida. Gary, you are unmuted.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, very good. Very good. Good morning, everyone. Gary Stillwell here in Alva, Florida. Several comments here. I'd like to take them in chronological order through the meeting here. In the action plan section, FDOT is asking that the task force's report be limited to 15 pages. This project is of a scope and cost that's never been done before in this state, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe that they should be limited to this kind of paper page limit. They also had a statement there that the task force cannot submit a report that recommends a no build. I also take exception to that. If that's what the task force determines from the data that they're looking at, then that's just exactly what they should report and recommend. We move on to high level needs in the natural environment and the purpose. I believe, as some of the other task force members have stated, that the water resources should be absolutely the #1 consideration here. If this road is constructed, you're going to have about greater than 100 square miles of impervious surface. The runoff is going to do just that. It's going to run off into canals that will be constructed to get rid of the water. It will not go into recharge, especially up in the northern to mid part of the state where the Floridan aquifer has its major recharge. Under the broadband part, Chapter 339.09 of Florida statutes has a restriction on transportation tax revenues. Funds available to the department shall not be used for any non-transportation purpose. And as far as right-of-way acquisition, the bottom part of that same chapter says that the authority does not extend the power of eminent domain to the department. So I think the broadband stuff is pretty much on the dime of the people who are trying to get this thing developed, not the state. Transportation connectivity, rural folks don't want connectivity. They don't want lights, traffic, or comm towers in their backyard. That's why they live there. The development is going to be rampant at every node of this road and will spread out to those people who do not want it. I think I'm running out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Stillwell. Up next, Matthew Schwartz from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Matthew, you are unmuted.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'm going to read a short couple of paragraphs from an article written in 2016 from the Florida Trend, hardly a radical publication in our state, one of the major business publications. And here's their take on what we called the Heartland Expressway, the Heartland Parkway, which is now the Southwest Florida Connector that we're speaking about today. This is from June 2016. A little more than a decade ago, a handful of large landowners and land use attorneys got together to map out a new future for the agricultural interior of Central Florida. The linchpin was a new, nearly 150-mile-long toll highway linking the outskirts of Orlando with the Southwest Florida coast, and unlocking development potential on all the ranch lands and citrus groves in between. They called it the Heartland Parkway. To the people and companies behind it, heavyweight Florida agribusinesses, including Alico, A. Duda & Sons, Likes Brothers, and Mosaic, among others, the Heartland Parkway made sense. The development of Florida's interior was inevitable, they argued, as more people moved to the state and control of agricultural companies passed on to a new generation of heirs with little interest in cattle or citrus. A highway would create a corridor in which landowners could develop portions of their property more intensely and more rapidly while setting the rest aside in conservation easements. End of the quote. By the way, I can add to the above, projects are already being constructed, expanded inside this particular corridor. That's the town of Ave Maria and the city of Babcock Ranch. And those are good examples of developments in progress, which will benefit greatly from this nearby toll road. And based on the endpoints of the corridor, as I said, this is the Heartland, the Southwest Florida Connector is the Heartland Parkway. Stop the reading and discussion of the article here, but what it does do, it lays out in a way that anyone could understand what is the real purpose, what are the real high-level needs, and real guiding principles of MCORS, all in a couple of paragraphs. MCORS is being presented here and elsewhere as a kind of great public works project for Florida that will have all kinds of benefits for the people and even wildlife of rural Florida. In reality, it's a project designed to help large landowners to cash in on their properties and make them more desirable for developers. In the little time I have left, for the folks who are scratching their heads about why agriculture is not mentioned, there you have it. It's not being mentioned because agriculture is the development of agricultural and ranching lands is the real overarching purpose of MCORS, helping large landowners convert their rural and agricultural lands to development. And that's the same history in the vast majority of the sprawl in our state, which we've seen over and over again. All the supposed benefits of MCORS, broadband, hurricane evacuation, sewage, even sustainable jobs can be done in much better ways. The only consensus document that should come out from here is a simple statement saying, do not build MCORS. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz, for your comment. Up next is Meredith Budd from Naples, Florida.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Meredith Budd, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Florida Wildlife Federation. I've spoken in previous meetings as well, so I'll reiterate our position in opposition to construction of the MCORS toll roads. Florida already has more toll roads than any other state, and several of the existing toll roads don't actually attract the sufficient number of drivers that support the economic impact that the roads will have. There's no evidence to support the proposed toll roads. These proposed toll roads would be any more economically viable. The unnecessary roads will cause irreparable damage to our natural resources and inhibit much needed water quality improvements. The state has finally begun to prioritize our water quality needs. And in fact, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Project, the state's spending currently billions of taxpayer dollars to remove roads in order to restore historic flow here in Collier County, where I live, with the Picayune Restoration Project. these new toll roads are counterintuitive to the state's long-term investments in restoring our water quality. It was discussed again today that the task force's role will be to develop guiding principles that will avoid, minimize, mitigate the department's planning and project development. I want to emphasize alternative is certainly one that will avoid impacts, and as such the task force should have the ability to make that sort of recommendation in their final report. I did want to touch on a comment that I believe Commissioner Taylor had stated earlier, and I wanted to emphasize it about consensus. It seemed that the report that is expected to be completed is looking for consensus, which, if I understand that word correctly, means that there's agreement upon all the task force members. And I heard that the consensus could include just not opposing something in the recommendations. And I wanted to just reiterate, I think the concern that perhaps Commissioner Taylor was trying to say was that I don't think consensus is necessarily possible if you have someone simply not opposing. That doesn't mean that they are in agreement, and consensus would be complete agreement on all of the recommended guiding principles. So I also wanted to flag that as a concern and something to perhaps be further discussed in more detail on what that final report will be including to actually get consensus from the task force members. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Budd. Up next is Kristen Rubin from High Springs, Florida. Kristen, you are unmuted.
Hi, my name is Kristen Rubin, and I'm with our Santa Fe River. I want to put on record that it seems much more important that Governor DeSantis designated the $90 million that is in the 2021 budget to be directed instead of the MCORs to be directed to the state of Florida for the Floridians, especially due to the time or due to the pandemic, and reiterating what was stated earlier today regarding consensus building process. Governor DeSantis signed a law that no matter what the task force recommends, the construction will begin 2022. Nowhere does it say the task force has the final say. In fact, it states from a slideshow from Fdot, consensus is striving for agreements members can support, accept, live with, or agree not to oppose. This is not very reassuring. I was glad to hear today more comments concerning agriculture, water shortages, wetlands, sea level risings, panther habitats, water resources, and massive evacuations due to hurricanes. We don't need new roads for broadband. And you could use mass transit, which is much more environmentally friendly to move product and people. Everything you want to minimize and mitigate is possible. Just say no to toll roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rubin, for your comment. Up next is Rhonda Ruff from Clewiston, Florida. Rhonda, you are unmuted. Rhonda, you are self-muted. Rhonda Ruff, you are unmuted and self-muted if you will unmute on your end so you can speak. Rhonda Ruff, you are unmuted and self-muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay. So first of all, I was driving, I had to pull off the road to find a place where I had Wi-Fi so that I could actually make this comment. It was impossible, and I've been communicating with your IT people by email all this time trying to enter a PIN code. So I agree with a lot of the causes that Lindsey Cross has taken up about public options here, but let me get my comments in here. I am really, really astounded, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club Calusa group. This is the Southwest Calusa group. Hendry, Glades, Lee, and Collier counties, approximately 2,000 members, and I'm on the board. I was shocked to hear that the guiding principles are not things that have been clarified to all the task force members all along. Not only that, but you don't have a definition, a clear definition of consensus, what it really means. So I really don't know how this project has begun without clear goals, and the public doesn't know if consensus will be achieved, and if it's not achieved, will the project actually go forward? Now, given this current state administration, I suspect that it will anyhow, because I have lost complete confidence in Governor DeSantis. He just recently dismissed the youth climate case, Reynolds v. Florida, because it was his judge decided it was a political decision. They have decided to ignore the kids' constitutional rights to preserving nature in Florida. And our colleagues on the environmental side have been gagged by this process. Every meeting we have, they can't participate because they're in your task force, but we don't even know if their comments are going to make any dent in what happens with this what I consider to be a DOT and investor-owned utility boondoggle in the state of Florida. If you want to spend money wisely in the state, do real, meaningful, cutting-edge climate change migration planning, not just building more roads and more small, sprawling communities. Make action. I agree with Shannon Estenoz's comments before that wildlife interaction has to be clarified. I have an experience that has given me pause in terms of my confidence in DOT as well. In my neighborhood, we opposed some very high and bright lighting at an interchange. First, DOT's consultant, PR consultant, lied to us and told us it was impossible to shield the lights, which now we're lighting our bedroom windows in our backyard. Then it took 6 months before they finally admitted that we could do it. Don't build this road.
Thank you for your comment.
This concludes the public comment segment of the virtual meeting. Thank you to all the commenters for taking time and speaking about this very important topic. Public input is vital to the MCORS process. Public comments may be submitted at any time to fdot.listens@dot.state.fl.us and will become part of the public record. I would like to thank the task force members for participating and receiving public comments today. We will be bringing you a summary of all written comments received to date at your July task force meeting. Thank you again for joining us today. This concludes the virtual meeting.